Get it?
Yeah, we got it.
We're here to light shit up.
Crackdown 3 is everything you expected it to be. Whether or not you see this as a good thing is down to your own personal preference. But right now, Crackdown is being hit with a multitude of mixed reviews, which are slamming the game for being too similar to the original and not bringing enough new to the table. Crackdown 3 has had quite a lot to live up to, considering that it had been delayed countless times since being originally announced back in 2014. This was predominantly due to its use of cloud tech to enable physics-based destruction of an entire city, which was one of the key selling points for this sequel, but ultimately feels like a tactile multiplayer, which is rather unrefined. In fact, let's start with the multiplayer. The multiplayer in Crackdown 3 is a 5v5 kill confirm type mode called Agent Hunter, which sees you facing off against a rival team in a fully destructible environment. The level of destruction is great, and to be fair to Microsoft, it does deliver on what they originally promised. But aside from that, the multiplayer feels very unpolished with minimal effort on everything else. The maps are bland in detail, there is no form of progression, and even worse, there is no facility to be able to invite friends into a game with you. The fact that you can't invite a friend into the same lobby with you is absolutely absurd for a 2018 AAA release, which screams out the fact that they released this unfinished. The ability to destroy buildings does add a new level of gameplay, which is not seen in any of the games, in which you can't stay hidden behind buildings and have to constantly stay on the move. After the first few matches, I was done with the multiplayer, and I can totally agree with what other people are saying, in which the multiplayer in Crackdown 3 is basically a glorified tech demo. Had this level of destruction been implemented into the campaign, I think that would have really made for a better use of this new cloud tech. The campaign of Crackdown 3 can either be played on your own or with a friend. I've played about 4 to 5 hours of the co-op campaign, but predominantly played on my own. But I will say now that this game is just as fun on your own as it is with a friend. When you start the game, you get to choose from a selection of agents to play as, including Terry Crews' character Jackson, which I'm sure 90% of the population out there have chosen. I mean, who doesn't want to play as Terry Crews? After this, you're shown a quick cutscene to give you some of the background of the story and set up the overall plot, which essentially revolves around you taking down a string of enemy factions to break down the defences of the main boss, Nearman, and finally take her out. And to be fair, after that opening cutscene, I just stopped paying attention to the story. It didn't pique my interest, and the enemy captains didn't feel fleshed out enough to make me care about them or want to know more about the story. But at the same time, this isn't a game which is built on its story. It's all about the gameplay and leveling up your agent. The story is just there to give some context to the world, and to be honest, I'm okay with that. It reminds me a lot of Ghost Recon Wildlands, which had a very similar setup in which you were taking out a string of underbosses to eventually weaken their defences and take out the main boss. That game also suffered from weak storytelling, but the gameplay was captivating enough to keep me playing. The City of Providence continues that unique styling of the original Crackdown games, but running on the Xbox One X with HDR at 4K, it really is one of the best and most unique looking environments of recent years. It does a great job of making you feel like you're in a not so distant dystopian universe. The art team did such a great job creating the visuals in this game. It's just a shame that unfortunately there isn't much variety across the entire map, resulting in what can sometimes feel like a copy and paste formula used to make the city larger than it needed to be. What is also extremely jarring is that some objects look like they were copy and pasted from the original Xbox game, with some vehicles looking incredibly boxy and having very poor reflective surfaces. Whether or not they intended to look this way, I can't be sure of, but in my opinion it doesn't look good at all and detracts from the great visuals found elsewhere. The main premise of the gameplay, as I mentioned before, is to take down enemy factions across the map. To do this, you have to level up your agent's abilities to become strong enough to be able to take them all down. Your abilities are broken up into 5 core segments: agility, strength, firearms, driving, and explosives. And how you go about leveling up these abilities is what drives the Crackdown series. To increase your agility, you must collect green orbs scattered across the map, usually in higher locations, which sometimes involves light puzzle solving and platforming, which in turn allows you to jump higher and run faster. Strength is acquired by performing melee attacks and throwing objects at enemies, which over time increases your agent's physical physique and lets you go from throwing dustbins to launching cars at your foe. Firearms is achieved through, of course, shooting enemies, which unlocks various new weapons which can also be unlocked by finding them in weapon crates throughout the world. Performing in car races and pulling off stylish maneuvers awards you with agency cars, which can transform in shape and size to tackle missions differently. And last of all, explosives. You level up your explosive abilities by basically blowing shit up. This method of progression is what keeps me coming back to Crackdown, as the game has a higher sense of reward than what I have experienced in other games, and encourages exploration of the city in a way that doesn't feel like a chore. Despite this being the exact same formula used in the original Crackdown games, it still holds itself up well, and a sense of reward is much more apparent than you would find in other AAA titles today. Despite all the fun I had in this game, I still had a sense of fatigue and disappointment. I loved the previous Crackdown games and spent hours chasing orbs across the city, and Crackdown 3 gave me a great feeling of nostalgia, which goes hand in hand with what I will say next, that Crackdown 3 feels the same. When something bears the title of a sequel, it triggers the thought of evolution or a progression of something that will stay close to its roots, but builds on the foundation of what worked before. But what Crackdown 3 fails to do is exactly that. It brings nothing new to the table, besides a forgettable tactile multiplayer which failed to live up to the hype. Crackdown 3 is ultimately nothing more than a more glammed up version of the original Crackdown back in 2007. I feel if this game had been marketed as a reboot, or perhaps even a remaster, its perception in the public eye would have been so much more positive, and not so negative about the fact that it's basically the same game we played almost 10 years ago. And for that reason, I really can't recommend it at its retail price of £50. Wait, isn't it on Game Pass? I don't have to pay 50 quid, I can pay £7.99. Basically free. I can get my friend to get it on Game Pass. I've waited years for this. Well, I've got nothing to lose, it's free. It'll keep you busy for a few weeks. I can get a week trial of Game Pass. I'm bored of my games. Multiplayer looks alright. Already got Game Pass, why not? I'll delete it if it's that bad. As long as it's better than Crackdown 2. It's free.